One of my favorite creators on this platform is VaatiVidya, and I've been subbed to his channel since 2017, when I started my journey through the Soul series. My favorite video series from him is his Prepare to Cry one, where he typically tells the story of a character or element of From Software game lore that has a particularly depressing or sad outcome or implication. He spun off this formula a few times with Prepare to Why and Prepare to Sigh as well, and today I'm going to rank all of them from Great to God tier. You're watching Rayl Deal Games, and I'm well aware this is an odd idea for a video, but as someone who's joined the YouTube game in just the last year and a half, I'm always coming up with videos that no one else has ever thought of doing. I love Vaati's work, and as such, I don't think any of these videos are bad, hence the fact I'm ranking this list from Great to God tier. To this end, I'll be looking at the videos primarily based on how Vaati's able to use his telltale storytelling style to convey the themes and stories of Miyazaki's hellish mindscape. I'm giving bonus points to stories that really tug at the heartstrings, however, the actual raw lore information Vaati covers in each video is going to count as well. Some of this work was made before DLCs and sequels release, so I will not at any point be criticizing Vaati for changing his opinion in later videos. In this way, I'm not reviewing or ranking the lore itself, I'm ranking Vaati's presentation and interpretation of it. Now there are 64 of these videos, each of which I watched at least 3 times in preparation for this video, which definitely took a long time. Nearly all of the footage you'll see in this video is my own, however, I will be bringing in short clips from Vaati's videos to explain more specifically something I like that he's done. I know full well that this means the video is going to be tough to follow for y'all out there, which is why I've included a playlist of all of Vaati's Prepare to Cry videos in the description below, just in case you need a refresher on which video I'm talking about. The videos in that playlist are ordered in line with this video to make it easier to follow along. Woo-wee! We're in for a long one today. Let's dive right in, shall we? Number 64, Demon's Souls Story Prepare to Cry trailer. Something I had forgotten over the years of watching Vaati's creations is how he used to create trailers for his video series. This treats each video series for each game like seasons of content, and as someone who's very recently watched all of these videos several times apiece, they really do fit that sort of design space. I actually can't imagine someone doing this on YouTube anymore, and in that way this video is hella unique. In fact, Vaati was in a realm all his own back in the early days of his channel. No one else was making this sort of content back then, no one I know of at least. As a vehicle for his future lore and story videos, this does a great job at drumming up interest for his upcoming productions. However, the piano in this video is a bit louder than it should be, as it really conflicts with and overrides Vaati's voice. It was cool going back to the early days of his channel because it was readily apparent that Vaati was figuring out his way through video production, just like everyone else does when they first get started. Number 63, Dark Souls 2 Story Prepare to Cry trailer. Honestly, Vaati makes better use of Dark Souls 2's intro cutscene in this video than the game actually does. I especially like his line, "The curse of life is the curse of want."
The curse of life is the curse of want.
This line distills the core theme of Dark Souls 2 in a lot of ways. The curse of the dark sign and undead is the core focus of the game, becoming reflected even within the game's mechanics, such as the loss of maximum health upon death. Vaati's voice and how it matches the tone and feel of From Software's work was a core part of his rise to success, especially since he often pairs this with beautiful, powerful writing. In addition to this, he is masterful at weaving voice lines from the games into his stories, making them add texture to each piece rather than being the entire framing of the video, outside of a few videos we'll be talking about later anyway. For example, listen to the way Vaati intertwines his voice with the words of the text.
Everything will crumble and waste away so that something new may be born.
This is a marriage of man and story, of analysis and truth, and it's core to Vaati's iconic style and design framework. Number 62, Dark Souls Story The Heroes of Firelink Shrine. The guiding question for this video is, what turns an undead into a hollow? At the time of this video's release, this was still up for massive speculation. Dark Souls was still new, and the story within was still buried under obtuse storytelling methods, an unwieldy, intricate web Vaati would seek to untangle. A lot of this video video is composed of voice lines from the crestfallen hero, which are cut well together, and really the only thing missing is Vaati's analysis and philosophical musings, the stuff that makes his work truly special. Number 61, Sekiro's Shadows Cry Twice, Blackhat Badger. What is happening to the children of Senpou Temple is going to come up a lot in the Shadows Cry Twice series of videos, but the core idea is simple. The monks of the Senpou Temple are experimenting on children in an attempt to discover immortality. Blackhat Badger participated in this system, leading to regret as he ruminates on what he's done. Within the context of the game, Badger's son had died, leading him to question the reason why he would continue to work for Senpou. He ends up sacrificing himself to save a little kid, redeeming himself in some small way at the end. The music Vaati uses at the end of the video really matches the sadness of Blackhat Badger's story in his last moments, especially with how his last possession is a gift for his child, a gift his child would never enjoy. Number 60, Dark Souls 2's lore questioned. This Vaati video is all about Dark Souls 2 speculation, and this is kind of interesting to watch in 2025, especially after having been introduced to VaatiVidya's channel through his videos on the Ivory King and Sur Alon, which we'll be talking about much later. One interesting theory Vaati postulates is the idea of the giants being reincarnated dragons that grow into trees in a kind of messed up evolution, and I also like his speculation about Dusk, the princess of Ulasil from the first game, being or becoming Nashandra. I don't think this video would be classified as a prepare to why these days, as I think Vaati would just roll it into a lore revelation style video. One thing I really liked about going back to his older work is being able to see how he experimented with his formula before settling entirely on a content lineup that just works. Number 59, Dark Souls story, Shiva the Traitor. It's not just Vaati's voice that makes his video so good, as he has a real command of language and literary devices. I especially like his line, "Steel can never betray you," from this video, as it matches the core idea of Shiva and his quest to find and acquire the Makoto. I really love the idea of a story centered around the continual passage of a blade from person to person, and it could be particularly innovative to frame a story from the sword's POV in this way. This video is just like his Heroes of Firelink Shrine video, where most of it is composed of quotes from the game, which is just fine, but I do prefer Vaati's authored storytelling. That's where his real skill for writing shines the best. Number 58, Dark Souls story, Nito and the Undead Curse. Nito's story is an odd one because Vaati is able to stuff this video with some great lore, but the actual focus on Nito himself is limited. I would guess this is likely because of the limited lore around the Lord of Death himself. It's not Vaati's fault that there isn't much to say, as Nito doesn't have a lot going on with this character. And I do like Vaati's speculation about why it is that the spreading of death factors into Gwyn's plan to keep the first flame alight. The lore revelations around the Undead Curse and how that factors into the god's plan for those within their dominion is crazy ahead of its time, as Vaati would be incredibly close to what Dark Souls 3 reveals about the Dark Sign, Dark Soul, Undead Curse, Way of White, and Gwyn's manipulation of humanity. Number 57, prepare to make Ciaran cry.
You! Is that not the soul of the man who fell on this spot? He was a dear friend. I wish to pay proper respect with that soul.
Do you want it?
Would you be willing to part with it? He was a dear Drop it! Ah! Oh, you! But, my dear Artorias.
This would be a reel these days, but it really shows Vaati's sense of humor and just how tuned in he has always been into the From Software gaming culture and community. It's funny and a great video, despite the lack of depth. Seriously though, this is a super sad interaction. Giving her Artorias' soul is what a good person would do, while crushing and absorbing his soul in front of her, taking away any chance that she may ever have a remembrance of him, is possibly the most evil thing a player can do in this game. Number 56, Dark Souls story, prepare to cry trailer. This trailer does a better job than the Demon Souls trailer of setting up Vaati's style in my opinion, and even though the music is a bit too loud I think, the video still manages to demonstrate more of his sense of camera angles and storytelling than the Demon Souls trailer. Something that is inherent to Vaati's early style is the philosophical nature of his work, and this video hits on that perfectly with the way he breaks down the chosen undead's success being tied to never giving up, rather than the sheer number of deaths they suffer. As such, this really is a great comparison companion piece to the Prepare to Cry videos that follow, and is a perfect introduction to Vaati's telltale storytelling style. Number 55, Demon Souls Story, The Evil in Latria. This video really demonstrates the idea of treating a setting like a character. Settings as characters is something that features in literature from time to time. Steinbeck's Salina Valley comes to my mind as a perfect example. In that way, the Prepare to Cry focus of this video is on Latria itself, and how its citizens were subjected to the horrors of the old man, and the archdemon taking the shape of the golden cloth.
The Elder may be powerful, yet the golden cloth he wears is still a demon. Its power is not his own, and his soul hardly matches its appetite. The cloth continually seeks a new vessel to control, and will abandon the old man to die once it has found that more worthy body. For the goal of demonkind is not to elevate humanity to their status, it's to wipe them out and obscure everything in fog. That's the cost of power here, and for some, it's a worthy price to pay.
The old man makes the denizens of Latria the subject of his experiments, using their flesh to make new demons and to absorb souls for the old one. Even those that escape from the prison are not safe from this fate, as they are turned into mangled abominations, forever severed from their humanity. In this way, Latria really represents the dangers of treating science, experimentation, and progress with the same fervor as a zealot does religion. Miyazaki's genius command and implementation of themes via the lore of his worlds and stories is a strength of his writing style, something I'm going to mention a few more times in this video for sure. Number 54, Dark Souls 3 Story, The Grand Betrayal. The idea that Firekeepers are as much prisoners to their fate as the player is particularly terrifying. Vaati defends this idea quite well when he says,
While Prince Lautrec was chosen to be a Lord of Cinder, Prince Lorien was the one suited for it. And so, Lorien must have had a great love for his brother, for he embraced Lothrec's curse, merging their two souls. Tragically, this left Lorien mute and crippled, yet it is said that Lorien indeed wished it so, all the same. There's this great mention of the grief of the twin princes, for once they came together, they rejected everything that had made this sacrifice necessary. So instead of linking the flame, they settled in their throne room and simply watched the fire fade from a distance, and with their strength combined, fought off any who would seek their cinders.
It's no surprise then that Lautrec and Lorien would betray the flame, a sacrificial duty they never consented to. Instead, the love of the two brothers is fierce enough to weather the age of ash and dwindling flame.
Have you ever noticed that the incinerating kiln is never too far from the kingdom of men?
The best Prepare to Cry style videos Vaati does are the ones that really hone in on these types of relationships. Two brothers caring too much for one another to be willing to see the other sacrifice for the continuation of a flame that's actively consuming the fabric of reality is such an interesting choice for the start of Dark Souls 3, as this is why the Lords of Cinder are roused from their slumber in the first place. Number 53, Sekiro Shadows Cry Twice, Shura. My favorite line from Vaati in this video is, "Words have meaning, but names have power," which really reminds me of Shakespeare's line, "What's in a name?" from Romeo and Juliet. Vaati's line is in reference to the naming of Sekiro, who was previously just Wolf. A name implies a connection to humanity in a lot of ways, which is why one most effective way to dehumanize another person or group of people is to take away their name. The way Shura, the manifestation of hatred for those that killed relentlessly, is handled between the shinobi and Ishin is super intriguing as well. Shinobi take on that karma, whereas the more samurai-coded Ishin sighs in regret and remorse to placate the Shura within his own spirit. From Software consistently tackles issues regarding the spirit and soul, and this philosophical exploration of hatred and how it's expressed between people is one of my favorite things about Sekiro's story. Number 52, an Elden Ring movie, The Warrior Within. This is the first of Vaati's Elden Ring Prepare to Cry videos we'll be discussing today, and there are two things that really separate his Elden Ring work from his stories about Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and all the rest. Firstly, the cinematic quality is way higher.
But in the end, you are the host to this warrior's death. And those beside you are simply summoned to share in your glory.
It's not like Vaati has never had a flair for the cinematic in his work, as he's consistently done a great job at utilizing game footage to accentuate and complement his writing style and storytelling. Secondly, Vaati connects the stories of more characters per video in his more recent Elden Ring stuff. As we've seen so far, and as we'll see the further we get into this video, Vaati really focused on one character, place, or theme for most of his Prepare to Cry work. I speculate that Elden Ring's interconnected network of interpersonal relationships, likely a product of George R.R. Martin's influence, makes this sort of story skeleton more viable than in the previous games. I really like his line, "One's choice of armor says a lot about him," because of how it potentially alludes to both the Fashion Soul Sword of FromSoft fan and Let Me Solo Her, an important cultural milestone in the history of Elden Ring's fan reception. I don't think I'm too far off in this either, because of the fact that Let Me Solo Her is the thumbnail of this video. Number 51, Sekiro Shadows Cry Twice, The Children of Senpou Temple. The Senpou Temple story is my favorite aspect of Sekiro's lore. We'll talk about Robert, the Armored Knight, and his son at a later time, but I love how the pinwheels denote the number of children that are killed by the monks' experiments and their pursuit for immortality. The real sadness of the story is how, just as Vaati says, the journey of the father dooms the son, which is a super interesting idea for a sad story. It's almost like the story of Daedalus and Icarus, except with the change that Icarus was forced to fly close to the sun alongside his father. This video is lower on my list simply because there is another video that covers the Senpou Temple in a way that tugs at the heartstrings much harder, but we won't get into that one until the top 10. Number 50, Dark Souls story, Velka the Crow.
In Japanese mythology, crows are messengers from the gods, symbolizing divine intervention and guidance on human affairs. The crow takes you to Lordran, where you become manipulated by the gods.
The way Vaati works his knowledge of mythology and storytelling conventions into his analysis demonstrates a key component of his skill in this space. Vaati is a great storyteller, and his knowledge of stories and focus on those that Miyazaki is likely to be influenced by as well really impacts his analyses of From Software's work. Dark Souls is very mythological in the framing of its plot, lore, and characters, and I like that Vaati really hones in on these elements in this video. This video is also a little experimental for Vaati's Prepare to X work, as it is broken into several possible interpretations instead of focusing on one narrative he believes to be true. The end of this video, bringing in the audience's interpretations, really shows how Vaati was experimenting with his formula at this time. Prepare to Y is a fun change from Prepare to Cry and functions to create almost like a book club experience for Dark Souls lore examination at this time, which is significant because YouTube coverage of From Software's lore was pretty barren at the time of this video's release. Number 49, Dark Souls 2 lore found in translation.
Most literal translations would sound like absolute crap, and a good example of a beautiful translation is the Japanese that became the gutter. Originally, this was at the bottom of the rubbish, but you agree, this literal translation sounds terrible, so the translator changed it to the gutter, which combines bottom and rubbish into one word. A brilliant, succinct translation. This is a game where written text means a lot, and the slightest mistake can and has affected our interpretation of the lore, and you're gonna see some more examples of that.
My favorite channel on YouTube is Resonant Arc, and they discussed the same issue a lot last year, and it's a pretty complex one. What Vaati says is valid, that translations need to be as close as possible to the original, and he touches on exactly what the Resonant Arc duo does too, as a raw translation is not always good because of the roughness of the writing present and how it converts over to English. Some artistry to the language is important as well, which is partly why the Vagrant Story and Final Fantasy XII translations are so good. I'd like to see how common these sorts of translation things are in From Software's work. The Rat King's Test makes much more sense than the Royal Rat Authority, especially since the boss in Dark Souls 2 just looks like a big dog. There's a balance between that artistry and accuracy with translations that is super hard to get right. Number 48, Dark Souls Prepare to Cry Remastered trailer. My favorite thing about this video is the way Vaati references all 9 of the original Prepare to Cry Dark Souls videos in this way.
5 years ago, we told 9 undead stories. One of the strongest man ever to make it to Anor Londo, who simply fell from its rafters. Another of a sorcerer in pursuit of great knowledge, who was undone by the secrets he found. For some treasures are not meant for men. And besides, even if you find the most powerful weapon in the world, there's no reason to think you can save those you love. Mankind will never escape the curse of the gods, so why not put your faith in them? Perhaps if we offer up our humanity, we may receive their love in return. But no, there was never any hope of that, was there? These were the stories of fools who dared to believe in something greater, hoping against hope that their final acts could have changed fate.
There is one weird issue with this video though, and that's how Vaati only ever made 4 of the 5 promised remastered videos. The one about Nito never came out, as far as I know. It may be that it's a Patreon exclusive or something like that, but I couldn't find it while working on this video. That's a little disappointing, but it's not like it's a knock against Vaati or anything like that. The man delivers when he delivers, and as someone who's fairly recently started making content, I've definitely promised things I haven't actually been able to produce, so I get it. The original Nito is one of the lowest ranked Dark Souls Prepare to Cry videos in this ranking, so it is entirely possible that the project just wasn't worth the time investment, or he otherwise never got around to making it. I like that video just like how I love all of the videos on this list, but the other Prepare to Cry remastered videos promised in this trailer definitely make more sense to prioritize. Number 47, Bloodborne Story, Eileen the Crow. The real thing I love about this story is the way in which Eileen the Crow passes the buck onto the player as the successful resolution of her questline. The way Vaati builds up into this by exploring all of the other conversations the player can have with her and the possibilities for how her quest can resolve really drives home how important her position as a hunter of hunters is to her. She protects the ranks of humanity from beastified hunters, but her age prevents her from being as successful with it as she used to be. Old age may bring knowledge, wisdom, and expertise, but in a field such as hers, a working body matters quite a bit as well. Number 46, Dark Souls 2 Story, Sinh the Slumbering Dragon.
Dragons have always been intriguing to humanity, with many believing they hold the secrets to life itself.
Now I really love dragons, and I've been considering making a video about the mechanical design of dragons in games, so I am typically biased in favor of stories that explore the interactions of dragons, humans, and others in fantasy settings. In this instance, Sinh is worshipped by the people of the Sunken City. Why the people here would worship him is up to interpretation, but I like how Vaati suggests for fear is the heart of reverence as a possibility. Fear often does relate to religion, as the fear of a power beyond human reach engenders religious reverence.
Dragons in all the lore have always kept to themselves. They either think themselves above man or do not care for his conflicts. You have to wonder about Sinh. Did he harbor malicious intent? He had poison in his heart, but when he was pierced by York's spear, the poison gushed out and restored his purity. This implies he was pure before, which suggests that the poison was placed within him.
Vaati's Dark Souls 2 work is how I was first introduced to his channel, and this video about Sinh was one of the first I ever watched. The focus on the kings and queens of each Dark Souls 2 DLC is a perfect idea for framing the exploration of the lore in each, as they are the key figures in the stories. Each king has a Chaos Queen, a piece of Manus, corrupting them and distorting their control. Alana singing the poison into Sin's heart is a subtle, subversive way of working assassination by poison into a story, especially with the way the poison makes Sinh villainous when he wasn't before. Number 45, Dark Souls 3 Story, Sulyvahn the Tyrant. Sulyvahn not belonging in a place of belonging is the thing about this video's focus that I really enjoy. The sections of this video that deviate into a discussion of the deacons in the church are super interesting, and this is part of what makes Vaati's videos so good, as they do a great job of explaining lore in a storytelling way. To me, lore and story aren't separate things, it's just a different part of the story itself, just as important as dialogue and plot. I also love the Dancer and Vort, so the inclusion of these two characters does make me like Sulyvahn's story more. In this way, this video is kind of like Vaati's Nito video, where the character on the tin is not the exclusive focus of the story, it's just that the story comes back to him often, with Sulyvahn being a character that mastered loads of conflicting skills and manipulated the politics of his age to feed a god to Aldrich, the Lord of Cinder. It's no surprise he deserved a video dedicated to him. Number 44, Dark Souls 3 Story, The Duty of Anri and Horace. Anri and Horace are the only two to escape Aldrich, and after they've become undead and unkindled, they quest to get vengeance on Aldrich for the horrors they faced in their youth. The thing that stands out the most about this video is Anri's fear of being alone, of failing the people closest to her like she did when she was younger, before she was unkindled. Anri's response to Horace's death is so sad.
Oh, Horace, why? Don't leave me. Not you. Not like the others. Oh, Horace. Horace. Everyone, forgive me. I was weak on my own.
Horace is a source of solace for Anri. Over the course of the game, Horace goes hollow, leaving Anri on her own. Once Anri defeats Aldrich, putting the trauma of her childhood to rest, she hollows, her purpose in life lost. She either hollows at Horace's grave or the graves of the little children consumed by Aldrich, making her one of the most tragic characters from Dark Souls 3. Number 43, an Elden Ring movie, The Lord of Frenzied Flame. The Frenzied Flame in Elden Ring consumes everything, whereas the old chaos in Dark Souls creates new and corrupts existing life. They're nice foils of one another, and this video is centered on Shibriri, the Frenzied Flame, and the lengths to which Vaik, and potentially the player, would go to save their maiden from their fate of flame. The way Vaati displays the fight with Vaik is appropriately epic. Shibriri is a madness manipulator though, taking the form of other bodies and convincing others to do the bidding of his outer god through deceit. It's fitting that this madness is represented in the eyes, yellow baubles, shriveled to the touch, since as Vaati says, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind, and the ultimate goal of the Frenzied Flame is the total consumption of all life. Number 42, Dark Souls 3 story, Greirat the Thief. The story of Greirat the Thief is centered around a conflict of social class, as Greirat is the Robin Hood figure in Dark Souls 3 lore. He steals from the nobles for his fellow undead, and for reasons we'll discuss later, this endears Greirat to Patches, who will save him while hiding his identity in the Onion Knight armor. As the world falls to ash, Greirat becomes willing to steal from the undead settlement, demonstrating a loss of concern for his fellow undead. Instead, he is committed to the player, even willing to risk his own life to steal from Lautrec Castle. Even though he fails, his death is a sort of peace for him, especially since Loretta, the only thing he cared about in the world, had been hanged for crimes unknown. Number 41, Djura, Retired Hunter. My first Bloodborne character was a powder keg hunter through and through. I rocked a cannon and stake driver combo, which was loads of fun. Djura being one of these hunters himself and coming into conflict with the player over the morality of hunting in Old Yharnam is super interesting. I like that Djura tries to shoot down the player out of remorse and pity for the beasts of Old Yharnam, saying, hunters are no better than the beasts they slay. At what point does a man become a beast? Are we really that far removed from the bloodlust of a beast? It's a core question in Bloodborne that comprises the crux of the game's themes and is something I hope Miyazaki explores further in a future game. Number 40, Dark Souls story, Lautrec the Embraced.
Knight Lautrec looks out for himself. If we are to judge him, then we should count our own sins first. You who invades for humanity. You who kills simply because something is in your way, or because they have something important to you.
I simply love the framing of this video start with the angle looking up at Lautrec. Is Lautrec a villain, or is he just another individual with goals that conflict with our own? Does he do worse things than we do as the chosen undead ourselves in Dark Souls? The questions of morality, selfishness, and predation that Vaati poses in this video are particularly intriguing. At the end of the video, he says, "Who wants to go hollow after all?" which really contextualizes Lautrec's actions. If the thing separating an individual from being a zombified, crazed husk was murder and the theft of humanity, how many of us could really say we wouldn't become Lautrec ourselves? The best part of the video is the way Vaati covers the fate of the Firekeeper, as she has no tongue, can't escape, and wishes only for the undead curse to end so that she may die in peace. There's a sort of mercy death provides the Firekeeper in this instance, even if it comes at the cost of our security and the sanctity of the Firelink Shrine. Number 39, Dark Souls 2 story, The Raven and the Royal Aegis. This video is really centered on the dichotomy between Velstadt and Rain. These knights are some of the cooler armored enemies in Dark Souls 2, which is a game definitely loaded to the brim with such sorts of legendary figures. Seeing Rain turn into Fume Knight, corrupted by a shard of Manus, a daughter of Chaos, is tragic, especially when his loyalty to his kingdom is taken into account. Tossed out by Velstadt, ever loyal to Vendrick, the king, he was left no recourse beyond finding another way of expressing his loyalty, leading him to reside at the ashen end of the crown of the old Iron King DLC. I loved the focus on knights, kingdoms, kings, and queens in Dark Souls 2, and figures like Velstadt and Rain factored greatly into that. Number 38, Dark Souls 3 story, Hawkwood the Deserter. Hawkwood, unfit to even be Cinder, is a coward, and this video explores the idea of a coward's place in a story of heroism. Knowing your best is not nearly enough. What do characters like Hawkwood and the player character feel like, having failed to link the flame? Hawkwood deserted the Undead Legion, but after seeing the player accomplish great things despite being Ash, he takes his place among the bodies of his compatriots, a deserter no more. He attempts to steal that which makes the player a dragon through honest combat, showing his dynamic character and change in behavior. Number 37, Bloodborne story, Alfred, Vile Blood Hunter. Alfred is a religious fanatic, and his only goal in life is to become martyred upon the successful elimination of the Vile Bloods, a flawed ideal due to their unkillable nature. He may mash the queen of the Vile Bloods to mush, but it is a futile gesture, as Annalise always comes back. In the end, he kills himself to become a martyr just like Logarius, despite being nothing but a failure. It's an ironic spin on a Miyazaki questline, making it stand out among the others within Bloodborne and From Software's other work. Imagine what he must think of his situation if he could see it beyond the confines of death. He'd never live that down in the afterlife, should Bloodborne have such a thing. Number 36, Dark Souls 2 story, Lucatiel of Marat. The way Vaati tells Lucatiel's story reminds me a lot of Alzheimer's, as you get to see a character that is exposed to the loss of memories, individuality, and existential despair.
Loss frightens me no end. Loss of memory, loss of self. If I were told that by killing you I would be freed of this curse, then I would draw my sword without hesitation. I don't want to die, I want to exist. I would sacrifice anything at all for this. It shames me, but it is the truth. Sometimes I feel obsessed with this insignificant thing called self. But even so, I am compelled to preserve it. Am I wrong to feel so? Surely you do the same in my shoes.
The loss of memory, the loss of self, is what she fears most, which is the exact reason I hope I die before I ever get Alzheimer's. The focus on a theme of being cured in Dark Souls 2 really hones in on this existential dread, and the way Vaati talks about Lucatiel and her brother shows why this fear is so ever-present. Did Lucatiel have to fight her brother? The one she followed to Drangleic in the first place? For her sake, I hope not. Number 35, Sekiro Shadows Cry Twice, The Soul of the Ashina. I like how this video is about the stories of Ishin and Genichiro, how Ishin becomes the Tengu, and why Genichiro does what he does over the course of Sekiro's main questline. Ashina, the land, took up the mantle of Genichiro's mother, and he treats the land as such. The juxtaposition of Ishin and Genichiro is done quite well, as Genichiro draws his sword for his country, whereas Ishin draws his blade for himself. This truly explains why they act the way they do, and considering how important they are to the overall plot of Sekiro, this is one of Vaati's key videos on the lore of the title. Number 34, Dark Souls story, Pinwheel.
Pinwheel the necromancer, who stole the power of a gravelord, a mother, a child, and a father, all fused into one form. His tale is one of guilt, regret, and a desperate desire to fix his mistakes.
Each mask represents a different member of the family, each brought together through necromancy. Something I've always loved about Pinwheel are the books dotting the exterior of his boss arena, as books commonly represent the quest of knowledge in these games. The way they are haphazardly tossed around the borders of the arena demonstrates the feverish fervor Pinwheel approaches its research. The real sadness of Pinwheel's story is how he's trying to split himself apart so that his family can live as individuals, if even only for a moment. It's a short, sweet, and sad story from Vaati, covering a character that was only ever memed on, never to be taken seriously before this video dropped. Number 33, Dark Souls story, Sigmire of Katarina.
I am Sigmire of Katarina, and you shall feel my wrath!
The thing that really put Vaati on the map was the way he told Dark Souls lore the way he did. I like how he pairs voice lines from the games with his gameplay footage, which for 2012-2013 is quite ahead of the curve for this sort of stuff. I like the way Sigmire is ruined either way. His life's purpose is taken away from him by the chosen undead saving him, but if the player doesn't, he dies. But in Lordrun, death is sometimes better than hollowing. The whole game is about resisting hollowing in the face of repeated death after all, and if the player gives up, that's the moment when the player's character hollows permanently, becoming another of the undead other players kill. The best part of this video is definitely the way Vaati displays the final confrontation between Sigmire and Sieglind, the sordid end of a father by his daughter. Number 32, Dark Souls story, Rhea and the Way of White. The guiding question of this video is eternal life a blessing or a curse? If returning to life shaves a piece of your humanity away, does being alive really matter at all? Rhea is forced to go into the catacombs as the Way of White dictates that all undead must do so in search of the rite of kindling. Down there, she is abandoned and fails in her task, being saved by the player character. Once she's taught the player everything she knows about miracles, she has no more purpose and is captured by Seath's servants.
Channelers are the eyes of Seath, and can be found in many lands. One of them frequents the Undead Church. While their motives are largely uncertain, it's known that Seath captures maidens for his experiments. The Channeler spies Rhea as she prays, and takes her to a cell in the archives. And that is where Rhea hollows, and spends the rest of her days.
If I do go hollow, then finish me off. I beg of you.
The sadness in her voice as she preemptively tells the player to end her, should she turn hollow, makes me think she knew it was inevitable. She knew she was running out of reasons for living, and a reason to remain human is what it takes to prevent hollowing. At least she wasn't turned into one of those tentacle monsters. It's a small mercy at least. Number 31, Dark Souls story, Gwyn and the Dark, Part 2.
There are no happy endings in Lordrun. Even if you do no wrong, tragedy finds you. Maybe you're searching for the light in a dark place. Maybe you're fighting to keep your sister alive. Whether you're adventuring for the sake of adventure, or risking your life for your lord, it will do no good.
Vaati was definitely more kind in his interpretations of Gwyn back in the Dark Souls days, but that makes sense because a lot of Gwyn's darker intentions for humanity became far more clear with Dark Souls 3, especially in the Ringed City DLC. Explaining the conflict between light and dark by following Gwyn's actions is an interesting way of framing the lore deep dive of this video, and this shows Vaati's development of his formula over time. There's a futility in attempting to find a happy ending in the world of Lordrun, but despite this, the theme of this game shines through. The idea of trying to find a happy ending despite this futility. Just like Vaati says, to carve out of futility a reason for living. Number 30, Dark Souls story, Black Iron Tarkus.
You got him on edge. Beat the shit out of him. Oh! Go, go, go. One more. Do it, do it, do it. Hit him. Hit him. Oh, bitch. Oh, bitch. Tarkus!
Black Iron Tarkus is the only knight to make it through Sin's fortress and is the reason the window is broken, allowing us to get further into Anor Londo.
He must break into the palace by the only path available. Up a narrow ledge, through a window, and across the ceiling rafters protected by painting guardians. This operation runs counter to his skills. Encumbered by his armor and huge weaponry, Tarkus falls to his death on the rafters, and is dragged into a corner by the painting guardians.
I love that this story is communicated to the player with subtle environmental clues, and this has always been one of Vaati's strengths in his work, as he's always been able to expand on even small details in the lore and stories of characters, especially with the gameplay footage he gathers to facilitate his writing. Number 29, an Elden Ring movie, The Blessing of Despair. Even though Morgott was cursed by his family and his world, he still loved the Erd Tree and tried to protect it longer than any of his siblings. Godfrey seems to show love for his cursed son, which demonstrates that Morgott may have been loved even if Marika's horned children were shackled beneath Lindell. They were living proof that her ideals of what the grace of gold is wrong, as they ignored the origin of life, the core of the Erd Tree, and how every aspect of the living represented traits of the Erd Tree itself. The way Vaati pairs this with the story of the Dung Eater is particularly interesting, especially since his story is so grotesque and mortifying. It makes sense that Vaati would pair these stories together, as these, and Elden Ring movie, Prepare to Cry videos, are mostly organized around leading up to one of the potential endings in Elden Ring. This is actually a pretty cool and interesting way of planning out the story, and he and his collaborators have done a lot of good work to justify the longer runtime of each of these videos. They are definitely movies in their own right. Number 28, Dark Souls Story, Gwyn and the First Flame, Part 1.
If there's one thing to remember, it's this. Fire fades, and it's inevitable and natural for the world to return to dark.
It is natural for the fire to fade, but Gwyn can't let that happen. Gwyn's story and the love of light is incredible, and the way Vaati starts out this video is quite great for explaining the basic idea of Dark Souls' story. Vaati's audio quality really jumped in this video, and it's clear he started to learn more about video editing at this time. Summarizing the core lore of Dark Souls' story is key to establishing Gwyn's rise to power and quest for the warmth of the flame. This is something Vaati would begin to do more in future videos, such as his Pontiff Sulyvahn from earlier in this video.
The Age of Fire was born, and the giants began their own story. But since this is a story about light, it is also a story about dark. For it is inevitable that one day the flame will fade, and only dark will remain.
The disparity and duality of elements and storytelling is crazy interesting, and is one thing most writers get wrong. Miyazaki just did a great job at making the disparity of light and dark an important part of Dark Souls' lore and vibe. And Vaati translates this idea into a far more digestible package for people who don't want to really dive into the item descriptions, environmental storytelling, and voiced lines themselves. Gwyn's family tree and the way he interacted with his children tells a lot about his characterization. He wants to preserve perfection, but perfection of that nature is impossible. This video covers a lot of different characters, which makes sense since everything revolves around Gwyn. I especially like how Vaati dives into the story of Havel, which is one of my favorite characters from Dark Souls 1. The fact that Havel would attempt to betray Gwyn would factor into Gwyn's mental descent, leading up to Dark Souls 1. Number 27, Dark Souls 3 story, The Nameless King's Betrayal.
How curious is it that a man inspired by a dragon slayer would be allied with the dragons that are right outside his gate? The world was changing, and in truth, those who aspire to conquer dragons overwhelmingly end up with them as their allies. Look to our nameless king, who was born for a war against them, only to ally with the vestiges of their race. Look to Vendrick, who inherited Gwyn's legacy, yet aspired to recreate their power. Look to the kingdom of Lautrec, whose knights were originally hunters of dragons, yet they ended up taming them and fighting at their side. Look at Prince Rickard, who fought in a stronghold filled with serpents and ended up being summoned as their champion at Archdragon Peak. Look to Havel, who adopted a spine of stone and a dragon's tooth only to uphold a sacred oath with their nameless king. And finally, look to Ornstein, the dragon slayer, who, laden with duties and oaths, decided that the only one that would matter was his pledge to Gwyn's exiled son. And so it was that the way of the dragon led him to the Nameless King's stronghold.
Vaati claims it was the gods, not the dragons, that failed to adapt, which is why the Nameless King far outlives his father and all of his siblings. He communes with the dragons much in the same way the other dragon slayers began to do so as time progressed in Dark Souls' world. In a lot of ways, this video is much more about Ornstein and the dragons themselves than the Nameless King, but I don't hate this. I love hearing about the dragons in every From Software game because they're usually so interestingly positioned within the lore and themes of the game they appear in. I really love the ending frame Vaati uses to finish out the video. His cinematic flair is quite good and demonstrates a precursor to his and Elden Ring movie series of videos from the most recent era of his channel. Number 26, prepare to sigh, The Pendant. This video is honestly incredibly funny. I played Dark Souls for the first time in 2017, so I had already known that this pendant did nothing because my friends told me as such. But I love the image of Vaati and a whole community of theory crafters running through the game hitting every single wall in an attempt to find the secret of this pendant, just for Miyazaki to confirm that it was a prank. Number 25, Dark Souls story, Oscar the Fateless. Everyone loves Oscar because he frees you from the asylum and gives you the Estus flask that saves your life constantly throughout the game. His reward for doing this is getting smashed through the roof by the asylum demon. He's there in the first place because of his family's prophecy, which also functions as the guiding principle of why so many undead make pilgrimage to Lordran.
Thou who art undead art chosen. In thine exodus from the undead asylum, maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know.
I like the way Vaati reveals what could have happened if Oscar of Astora had been able to flee the asylum alongside the player. I don't know if the game would be better if Oscar had lived and the final confrontation had played out at the end of the game, but ending the game on Gwyn definitely seems like a stronger point. The cut voice lines of Oscar are quite cool, and even though Oscar canonically hollows in the asylum, this is a cool idea for a hypothetical story, as it complicates the immorality of who is right in regards to the flame. Is Gwyn right, or is Darkstalker Koth?
Whatever path you choose, Oscar chooses the opposite. Driven by a need to be important, he opposes either choice you make. Whether you finish off the dying god, or leave the first flame to die.
So it was you. I had a feeling. I shall destroy you, as fate has commanded me. Foolish pawn of Darkstalker Koth, and fiendish Dark Lord.
Perhaps you choose to replace this dying god, and rekindle the Age of Fire.
I have waited for thee, foolish slave of the gods, and pawn of Framt. I will kill you, and become the true Dark Lord.
I think it ultimately is a better game with Oscar's potential futures cut out, as it makes the choice something the player has to struggle through on their own, much like they had to do through the whole game itself. Number 24, Dark Souls story, Big Hat Logan. Using the power of the soul to fuel sorcery is a dangerous habit. Seath wants the immortality he was denied from birth, and he discovers the secret to it by harnessing the power of crystals, which makes this particular section of Dark Souls feel like a darker version of Final Fantasy to me.
Somehow, crystals are linked to the soul, and so through the power of crystals, Seath finally finds what he's been looking for.
In this way, Seath is the smartest boss the player has to contend with lore-wise.
The archives now lead anyone strong enough to a chamber with Seath himself inside. Upon your death, Seath locks you in a cell with a bonfire, knowing that you'll be locked into a cycle within that cell.
He understands that the only thing that could kill him is an undead, and inoculates himself against a never-ending cycle of defending himself from some Krabby Patty soldier that refuses to give up. It's no wonder Big Hat Logan is interested in learning the secrets hidden in Seath's library, but instead of this research bringing him unparalleled knowledge, it drives him insane. What exactly did he learn? Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. Number 23, Dark Souls 2 story, Alon and the Iron King. Something I really like about Dark Souls 2 lore is how it is centered on kings, knights, dragons, and giants. There's a real potential for a remake of this game, as all of the individuals in the lore could be so cool with better gameplay and level design. Sir Alon kept the Iron King's first throne, a sentimental item. Sir Alon respected the old Iron King, but couldn't stand beside what he'd become. Instead of being killed by the Iron King, Alon commits seppuku in accordance with his code of honor. Once the Iron King saw what Alon had secreted away, his old throne, he enshrined Alon's armor and renamed his guard Knights of Alon. Taking Alon's soul, he has an automaton crafted from it, which would become the Smelter Demon. This story of a knight and his king, of friends separated by greed and the lust for power, is a true highlight and strength of Dark Souls 2's The Crown of the Old Iron King DLC. Number 22, Dark Souls 3 story, Yorm the Lonely Ruler. Despite how hard he worked works, Yorm, because he's a giant, never attained the respect of his subjects as the ruler of the profaned capital. It didn't matter what he did, as even providing them with the tool to destroy him if he ever betrayed their trust didn't foster faith for him amongst the people he sought to make his own. In the end, they still didn't honor him even as he kindled the flame to keep their society alive, becoming a soul of cinder in the process. But not all people treated Yorm as a pariah, as Sigurd was great friends with him, promising Yorm that if he should ever shirk his duty, he would come to end him. As such, Yorm gave him a giant slayer sword, and despite not wanting to, Sigurd does as requested, putting Yorm down in accordance with their friendly pact. I love the way From Software tells stories of two friends who are put against each other, just like the Ciaran and the Iron King in Dark Souls 2 from the previous entry. Number 21, an Elden Ring movie, Age of the Duskborn.
The War of the Ancient Dragons began thousands of years ago, and the Erdtree capital came under siege, led by a gargantuan dragon named Gransax. The dragons wielded heavenly bolts of red lightning, and so the Knights of the Erdtree learned to fortify themselves against it, and stayed on the defensive until Godwyn the Golden delivered the decisive blow. He stood before another legendary dragon known as Dread Fortisax and defeated him. But instead of granting death, he showed mercy. He offered friendship. And it was with this act that the ancient dragons and the Golden Order truly became one.
What I said before about loving the way Miyazaki and From Software use dragons in their fantasy works remains true for this game too, and the way Vaati uses artistic interpretations of these lore events for his retelling is a real stroke of innovation upon his formula, considering the fact that the interesting parts of Elden Ring's story is centered around the gods of the Golden Order. It makes sense to flesh out the sections of the story otherwise unattainable in this way. Godwyn the Golden being killed on the same night as Ranni, who planned the deed, is a sacrilegious sacrament of the like the Golden Order would never recover. At the base of an Erdtree root, the destined death that took Godwyn merely severed his spirit from his body, causing his body to exude a perpetual pulse of deathly disease. The roots take up Godwyn's cursed essence, spreading it all over the land. Pairing this story with the quest line of Fia and the Duskborn ending makes sense, and I particularly like some of the philosophical and moral ideas Vaati espouses in this video. Does absolute evil exist? This idea is in reference to the Death Hunters, which treat the spread of death as a great evil, despite it being just from the circumstance of Marika's decision to separate life and death in the first place, something that functions as her original sin. This idea is definitely expanded upon in the Shadow of the Erdtree, when the Shadow of Death is uncovered by Miquella, a realm of sordid souls denied the grace of gold. Blanketing that realm, secreting away the Sea of the Dead, did not save Godwyn from death, nor did it stop Ranni's body from passing beyond the reach and influence of the Fangers. This demonstrates the fallibility of those that would be God, as the decisions of the mortals beneath can always foil every infallible plan, ironically so. Number 20, an Elden Ring movie, Children of the Scarlet Rot. My key takeaway from this Vaati video is how Millicent acted differently from her mother and her sisters, each born from a petal of Melania's scarlet rot bloom. From birth, Millicent was raised to be an heir to Melania, but in her final moments, Millicent manages to preserve her dignity, withering away for her own sake, while Melania holds on to Miquella's husk, her heart too stolen to allow her to think of anything else. Something I didn't consider on my first playthrough of Elden Ring this past year is how the scarlet rot is not a disease, it's an outer god, as Vaati says. In this way, Vaati says, to rot is to die, form new buds, and be reborn, causing the rotted to bloom with vibrant red petals. The outer gods element of Elden Ring lore is what really makes the lands between and pantheon therein feel like this middle ground between Dark Souls and Bloodborne, taking a key element from each and turning it into something completely new. Number 19, Demon Souls Story, Ostrava the Hero.
By definition, only the coward is capable of the highest heroism. For the coward fights despite his weak nature.
This is the first video in which Vaati explored the idea of a coward's place in a warrior's world, and in a lot of ways this story is framed in a similar way to Sigmar of Katarina. The difference is how Sigmar and Ostrava are foils of one another.
Tragically,
Prince Alant discovers that his father has in fact become a demon. This is not quite the truth, as the real Alant resides within the old one, but either way, it is true that Alant, once a benevolent ruler, is indeed responsible for the demon scourge that wiped out humanity.
Oh, it's you, is it? My father is up above. Well, what's left of him anyway? He's transformed into a fiendish demon. I began this quest in a search for truth, but it seems I was a fool to even try. Please, kill my father. In his degenerated state, he can only bring peril to the lands. This key fits the Boletaria mausoleum. Inside the mausoleum are my father's two swords, Soulbrand and Demonbrand. Use them to bring an end to this madness.
Despite his lack of skills in the way of combat, Ostrava makes it to his father's throne room to see him be an archdemon as rumored. This would be so terrible to see in person, as who wants to see their father fall so far? Ostrava kills himself in soul form, attaining true death and turning into a red phantom, which is something he feared above all else. As such, everything he feared came to pass, and as a coward, fear defined his life all the way till his end. Number 18, an Elden Ring movie, The Poison of Teolier. At the time of this recording, this is Vaati's most recent and final Prepare to Cry video. It ends with a message that a part 2 is coming, and I speculate that story will be about Miquella and Radahn, but we'll have to see. I'm excited about this, and you better believe I'm watching that day one. Heck, it may even be out by the time this video drops, and if so, let's discuss where it would place in the comments below. As for the Poison of Teolier itself, the focus on sleep and the comparison of lush lavender lucidity, plush with purple mist, to the release of death is particularly interesting, especially with the way Marika separated life and death. Death does not hold relief, so people seek solace within the velvety covers of a deep sleep. In this way, eternal sleep is a balm. And isn't this how it works in the real world? When I get depressed, the sweet succor of sleep slakes my nerves and is the only thing that assuages suffering. Within the lands between, this seems to be the only escape from Marika's sin. Sir Moore asks, must we be sad forever? This is the essence of a rough life. Is sleep the only solace that remains us from a sea of suffering? Teolier says he wants to be sent drifting off in a sea of her poison upon seeing Saint Trina, yet it is not he that Miquella's other half views as her champion. She tells the player to grant Miquella forgiveness of which can only be given with the swift strike of a blade. It's fitting that this location would be in the Cerulean coast, as that location really feels drowsy as the dreaming dawn in a way no other location in the game does. Number 17, Demon Souls Story Origins. Something Vaati is great at doing is explaining the differing functions of souls between Demon Souls and Dark Souls in this video. Focusing more on the crumbling remains of a dying world, Origins does a great job at representing and displaying the fall of humanity. Even in his early work, Vaati is just simply excellent at telling complex stories in short time frames. You know, I don't like Demon Souls, I've never been able to get into it, but going through Vaati's videos again really makes me want to try once more. Let me know in the comments below if you'd all like me to do that. I think it could be cool to juxtapose the remake and the original from a first-time complete playthrough perspective. Number 16, Demon Souls Story, The Fall of Boletaria. Durant making Soulbrand and Demonbrand reminds me of Soul Calibur and Soul Edge from Soul Calibur, which is one of my favorite things about that franchise. King Allant XII takes Soulbrand, taking Boletaria in the direction of the Soul Arts, his divine punishment of which is being turned into an abomination that represents his suffering and the consequences of attaining the power of an archdemon. In some ways, this is a companion piece to the Origins video, almost like a remake of that video like the Demon Souls remake itself that this video was likely made for. This one is more in-depth, which makes it better for someone who has played the game, whereas Origins is a good video to watch before playing Demon Souls. Including elements of Ostrava's story makes this a combination of Origins and Ostrava the hero, which definitely factors into why it places higher than both on this list. Number 15, Demon Souls Story, The Defilement of God. The big revelation of this video, the core crux of why it's so good, is how magic and miracles are two sides of the same coin within the Demon Souls mythos. This focus on the origin of magic allows Vaati to explore the stories of two important women within the story of Demon Souls, the Maiden in Black and Astrea. These two women demonstrate the pinnacle of power that can be achieved through miracles or magic, with the Maiden in Black being possibly the one who awakened the Old One. As such, she's the shame of the Monumentals, a vestige of their quest for power through the soul arts. On the other side of the coin is Astrea, the woman of the church who would become an archdemon. Yet in her case exclusively so, she doesn't lose her spiritual soul, maintaining her empathy for the defiled ones. The lost and unclean are simply victims of circumstance, much like impoverished people in the real world. Her heart aches for these defiled ones, so she becomes an archdemon to steal souls, to steal suffering from those that rot in the valley. She comes to the truth of her church's God, as the only natural evil that could exist would be a God that allows so much pain and suffering. To provide them succor, she has to steal souls from others that are perhaps undeserving of a soul-sucked existence. Vaati asks at the end of the video, do the ends justify the means? Which is the second time he's done so in a Prepare to Cry video. We'll get to that second one later. It's a tough question that is impossible to answer in Astrea's case. Is there anything to justify when the origin of all power is evil? That's the question I would ask. Number 14, Prepare to Cry Remastered, Siegmeyer the Adventurer. Starting out, I love that Vaati establishes the hypocritical nature of knights within the Souls series. Despite this common motif, Katarina doesn't seem to share this trait with other kingdoms. All the knights maintain their knightly virtues. Siegmeyer comes to Lordrun seeking adventure, pure and simple. He can only maintain his humanity if he's allowed to surmount obstacles, so by helping him out, the player takes his achievement away from him.
The name Siegmeyer means victory, and that is what you take from him.
I'm kinda the same way. I have this thing against guides, exploits, and busted strategies. I typically enjoy games less if they are made too easy, or if the clear path to victory is laid out before me. Saving Siegfried drains his belief in himself, dissolving his humanity. The real sadness in this video that justifies its inclusion in the Prepare to Cry lineup of videos is Sieglind. She has to kill her father, and this is where the original Siegfried video ended. But Vaati's Prepare to Cry Remastered video series came out after Dark Souls 3, affording him the ability to take each character's story just a little bit further. Siegward, one of Sieglind's line, attempted to link the flame, reawakening later when the Lords of Cinder spurned their fate. In this way, Siegmeyer's bloodline ends in glory.
With his duty fulfilled, Siegward succumbs to his wounds, and Siegmeyer's bloodline ends in glory, in an adventure for the ages.
Number 13, Prepare to Cry Remastered, Gwyn's Light. During his Prepare to Cry Remastered series, Vaati shows off his literary knowledge a bit by framing this video thematically around the Dylan Thomas poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, which coincidentally is one of my favorite poems. It summarizes Gwyn's story quite well in a thematic sense, you know, if we set that final stanza aside at least. Gwyn refused to go gentle into that good night of a flameless world, instead othering the undead with a religion concocted by him and a sequence of daggered gifts. He profits from the undead curse, gaslighting those afflicted with it into worshipping him, such as his craving for light and inability to return to the darkness that awaits him. The Age of Fire, which should have had a beginning, middle, and end, circles in on itself so much that the world itself begins to burn to ash, creating a hellscape of an apocalypse, ending an era of light with a whimper back into the uniformity of dark. Number 12, Dark Souls Story, The Sisters of Chaos. The disparity of dark and light is core to the basic framework of Dark Souls' story.
Humans were born from the dark, but we are drawn towards the light. We are warmed by fire, but this fire we cannot touch.
It's the ironic nature of the light being born from the flame that the Sisters of Chaos are consumed by its warmth. The refusal to let the flames fade is predicated upon the idea that dark is bad, but is that really so? Was it the Witch of Izalith's punishment to be turned into the bed of chaos because of her refusal to let the first flame pass to ash? Life is birthed by the flame, and I love that demons are born from the witch's fear to let the flame fade. The flames of chaos create wild life in shapes thus viewed to be unnatural, but the humanity humanity of the witches doesn't fade despite their creation of the Chaos Flame. Quelaag's commitment to her sister, and how she kills others for their humanity to preserve the Fair Lady, demonstrates how she didn't learn from the witch's mistake. Holding on to those things that have long passed leads to more suffering. In this way, this story kind of reflects what happens to us if we hold onto too fiercely the memory of days long past, or our passing loved ones. I especially like how Vaati shows the different ways this story with the Fair Lady can end. The player can kill her or feed her humanity to preserve her, but which one is right? Should we preserve her life despite its lower quality, or should we commit murder despite her being defenseless? Does right even exist within the shadows cast by the flickering flame? Questions like these are why Vaati's work and From Software stories are so good. Number 11, Dark Souls 3 story, Patches the Unbreakable. God, everyone loves Patches despite everything he's done. Patches makes it to the end of the world without hollowing because his goal in life is to punish the greed of others. Because of the nature of man, Patches is never short on subjects for his judgment and trickery.
Every age, it seems, is tainted by the greed of men. Rubbish to one such as I, devoid of all worldly wants.
For the first time, Patches helps you on your quest in a perfectly fitting way. He sets you on the path to the Church of Filianor, where he assists you one last time in your quest to weaken the Lord's grip on the Ringed City. He did always despise clerics, charlatans he calls them, and it's fitting beyond words that Patches would play a part in undoing the greatest lie of all, undoing the greed of the gods that's rooted in faith, in Filianor, and in fire.
I really buy Vaati's interpretation of Patches in this video, and it's interesting to view Patches in this way, given the fact that for the longest time, he really comes across as just a mischievous little imp in the previous games. Knowing there's a method, a point to his trolling, makes him such a better character. It's interesting looking back at these old videos, since this is when Discord was new. He talks about Patreon in one of these older videos as well, which was new nearly a decade ago too. Number 10, Demon Souls Story, The Demon Astray. I do enjoy Vaati's original video on Estrella over his one for the remake. I love the focus on the juxtaposition between holy clean garments and the land of filth.
In truth, Estrella did great good in the valley. Her heart was broken by the plight of the depraved, and she cared for them and healed them, and they worshipped her as a Christ-like figure, for she cared for them where no one else would. So by the time the demon fog rolled over the world and through the Valley of Defilement, Estrella had changed. The valley had stripped her of any belief in her god. How could a benevolent god allow these people to suffer? The church wasn't worshipping God, it was more like they were worshipping the devil.
The way Vaati sets up the Old One being the root of miracles in this way without saying so is just perfect, and I think he focuses on Estrella better than his second take on the character. She's the only human to maintain her mind through the demon transformation, and afterwards she resurrected the aborted babies floating in the festering swamp. Because she's an archdemon, she has to die, even if she's good down to her root. She gathers souls for the Old One only to maintain her position, a position she uses to help the defiled. This shows that a demon's soul can be used for good. Vaati's final question about whether the ends justify the means is more poignant in this video as a result. Is killing her right, or is morality a sham? Despite not ever really getting into demon souls, these sorts of questions make Estrella one of my favorite characters. Number 9, Bloodborne Story, Father Gascoigne. The main reason, this video cracks my top 10 is because of Father Gascoigne's daughter, the one that is doomed to be consumed by a pig.
Trace the path she would have taken. Imagine this little girl creeping through a sewer filled with crawling corpses and carrion crows, to run past it all and come so close to the chapel, only to spy this thing at the end of the tunnel. It eats the little girl, and after your revenge, you find the bloodied white ribbon upon its remains.
You haven't by any chance seen my little sister, have you?
Someone did come back for the little girl. Turns out Gascoigne had 2 daughters, and you just sent one to her death.
I told her to look after the house, but she's run off somewhere. She's still quite small, and wears a big white ribbon. Have you seen her out there anywhere? Oh, how did this happen? Why would she ever go outside? At least I'll have something to remember her by.
This whole sequence is some of Vaati's best work in my opinion, and it's why this video placed so high for me, especially given the fact that the older sister commits suicide upon receiving her sister's bloodstained ribbon. Number 8, an Elden Ring movie, Age of the Stars. Learning about the Marika family line is one of my favorite things about Elden Ring lore, as they are the main characters in the story, and it makes sense that Martin did most of the writing and world building for this game because they are as complex as the characters in the Song of Ice and Fire series, without just being dark fantasy ripoffs of each, which would have been easy enough for him to do. The inclusion of Adula, a dragon who'd sworn fealty to Ranni, Blythe, E.G., and the Age of Stars ending is so cool, and I would love to see a video of this ilk for the Kings of Dark Souls 2 or Gwyn's family tree. The issue is that there probably isn't enough voice lines from each game to create a coherent storyline of this video's like. Blythe specifically is such a sad character. He's essentially the old Yeller of From Software, a loyal wolf that has to be put down because of him becoming rabid. This video is also one of Vaati's more entertaining ones because of how he weaves in moments of Soulsian humor like this.
Hey!
I also like how he shows us what a first-person perspective in a Souls game could look like, making me really want From Software to take another crack at Kingsfield or a spiritual successor of some kind.
Please, Ranni. She needs me.
Number 7, Sekiro Shadows Cry Twice, Robert and the Armored Knight. I actually kind of love reading about Japanese history regardless of the era. While in high school I read this complex history book about Japan, which is where I first came across the Meiji Restoration and other important events. So I particularly love this story because of the historical framing of how Vaati starts out his video. And man, he even works in some religious ideals of Buddhism. I'm not a religious person, but I have to say that I identify with loads of Buddhist ideals. While all of this is cool and definitely a strength of the video, the reason this video is so high is because of the Armored Knight's story. It's such a sad one that I didn't pick up on during my playthrough of Sekiro.
He died thinking he'd failed his son.
The way Vaati displays this scream of Robert is what really seals the deal on this Prepare to Cry, and drives the power of its emotional narrative home. Vaati's statement, he died thinking he failed his son, is one of the saddest things I've come across in his work, and really reminds me of Theoden's line, no parent should have to bury their child.
No parent should have to bury their child.
And that's a theme that continues in the next entry. Number 6, Demon Souls story, The Burden of Stockpile Thomas. Stockpile Thomas abandoned his family, being stuck in the Nexus. They were isolated and killed, and once again, the thing that gets this video so high is one line from the character focus of the video.
That hairpin, that belongs to my daughter. Then she didn't make it after all. My dearest little baby. May she rest in peace.
It's just sad, man, and there's no greater terror for a good father than to see their children lie dead before them. Number 5, Dark Souls story, Solaire and the Sun. The juxtaposition of Icarus and Solaire is a good one, especially with the possible bad ending for him. The question of Gwyn's banished child would surround Solaire as a possible heir for a long time, and while the Nameless King is Gwyn's lost lineage, Solaire thematically made sense as a source of speculation for this without the hindsight Dark Souls 3 provides. Vaati establishes a good connection between the God of War and Solaire. Without knowledge of Dark Souls 3, this is a pretty good theory, and this is why I really like Vaati's theory crafting. He's sometimes especially ahead of the curve in this space of content. If everything in regards to the lore of these games were objective, there'd be no room for the interpretations everyone within this section of YouTube make, and it is the intersection of their lore analyses that I think the truth of Miyazaki's vision resides.
Solaire, a man of indomitable will, loses his mind to a creature that looks like the sun, and dies to your blade. Or does he?
I especially like the way Vaati portrays both possible endings in these early videos. The good ending for Solaire has him kindling the first flame because his flame was truly the brightest in the first Dark Souls. Is it really any shocker that he was like the favorite character of the series for so long? Number 4, Prepare to Cry, The Children of Chaos.
Finally, after 1,000 years of survivor's guilt, she meets us, Someone who can finally break the stalemate. She lacks the strength and the bravery, and we have a Lord Vessel to fill.
You would betray us, I should have known. My dear fair lady, you are in danger.
Quayla, what was that? Is something troubling you? Quayla, but why?
Why, you monster! The fair lady! What have you done? What have you done?
This is why I love this video more than his first one about the Sisters of Chaos. The way he frames the death of the Fair Lady and Quaylana's survivor's guilt, a sister he didn't talk about much in the first video, is just so beautifully painful. Quaylana's line, "Always fear the flame, lest you be devoured by it and lose yourself," summarizes her viewpoint on her family extremely well. And when the player comes across her in Dark Souls 3, the true sadness of her story is clear.
And behind an illusory wall lies the corpse of Quaylana, curled up to the Fair Lady. She finally found the strength to return home.
Like I said at the top of the video, Vaati's work that hits the heartstrings the most are just the creme de la creme of his Prepare to Cry work. Ceaseless discharges, endless vigil over what he thought to be Quaylana's corpse, her part in the death of her living sisters, and her closure with her guilt are all just excellent points of this video and makes it one of his better productions. Number 3, Dark Souls 2 story, The Ivory King.
Inevitably, there came a moment where the Ivory King sensed the degradation of his own soul. In this moment, he made a decision. He would not run from chaos. Rather, he would give himself to chaos in order to appease the flame. Without a word, he left his home, he left his wife, and he left his country, but not without one final act. For before he set off to strike at the heart of chaos, he entrusted everything to Alsana. Upon his parting, he handed her a Leam Lois, the city, and a ceremonial blade by its namesake. The twin blades of Leam Lois, one light and one dark, were entwined as the Ivory King and his Dark Queen once were. He knew Alsana was a child of dark all along, but he said nothing. He believed her to be more than the sum of her parts, and so she was. The king's belief in the queen allowed her to rise above her dark nature. It was his final gift to her. But then he left, never to return.
This is such a beautiful piece of writing, and Alsana tasks us with killing her husband, not because of her evil nature, but because she wants his soul to be free from the old chaos. The Ivory King is such a Chad that he's possibly my favorite From Software character overall. Building a city to keep something within the walls, believing in someone else so much that their dark nature fades away, and sacrificing his very soul for the needs of the world are all things few characters in gaming would ever do. He is a stalwart shield made flesh, and the best part of Dark Souls 2. Number 2, Dark Souls story, The Legend of Artorias the Abyss Walker. This is the video that got Vaati started, and it holds up. His storytelling matches the vibes of the intro cutscene to Dark Souls, and this is further accentuated by the music. The audio quality in his work would go up over time, but that's the way it goes with all creators. Even his cinematic flair is displayed in this work with this scene.
May strike thine ear as somewhat peculiar, but long ago, in my homeland of Ulasil, I was beset by a creature from the abyss. I would have perished then, were it not for the great knight Artorias. In truth, I saw little of what transpired, for mine senses were already fled, but even still, there was something about Artorias, a certain balance of the humors that quite perfectly fits your semblance. Heavens, could it be that?
But the best part of this video is Sif.
Living with the knowledge that his master saved him with his last uncorrupted breath, watching him become a husk, only capable of tormented screams. He keeps the Ring of Artorias, knowing that many will try to traverse the abyss, and defends his master's grave. Imagine what he is feeling when you come to him years later for the Abyss Walker ring that debilitated his friend. He is trying to protect you. One of you will have to die, because Sif will not give you the Covenant of Artorias willingly. Maybe in death, he can find his friend Artorias again.
This is why Sif is one of my favorite From Software characters. He's not just a dog, he's doing things to save the player from the fate of his best friend, and in the world of Dark Souls, death is sometimes better.
Sometimes, death is better.
The alternate cutscene with Sif when he recognizes the player is legit the saddest thing From Software has ever made. But before I get any further, we may as well move into our next entry, given what it is. Number 1, Prepare to Cry Remastered, The Legend of Artorias, the Abyss Walker. Yeah, Vaati's retelling of Artorias and Sif is my number 1 favorite VaatiVidya Prepare to Cry video, and to be honest with you, it's probably my favorite video he's ever made, period. His remastered video beats out the original because of the additions he adds from Dark Souls 3's lore. The remastered Prepare to Cry series is some of Vaati's best work because of how he really works in everything that he learned about content creation and the expanded lore of From Software's creations over the 5 years that separated the original videos and the remastered ones. He's able to weave all of this together in a way that is perfectly understandable, even to those that only played one of the games. He even works in another great Dylan Thomas reference with the line, "Rage against the dying of the light." Manus comes from the Ringed City originally, which is a crazy cool connection between the first and third game. Vaati builds on his previous ideas regarding Artorias' compatriots, Gwyn's gaslighting gifts, and even shouts out a new and upcoming YouTuber. That's awesome because the Legend of Artorias started his channel, and it is just another data point that really shows Vaati's personality behind the scenes.
The Legend of Artorias sought none but a fabrication, traversing the dark. 'Tis but a fairy tale.
Alvina is keen to downplay the legend of Artorias because heroes and bandits have begun seeking out his grave. They would desecrate his legacy for the secret of abyss walking, and they may do harm to Sif, who, in fact, Alvina helped you rescue back when the world was still young. Imagine what Sif is feeling when you cross paths again years later. You're duty-bound to seek the abyss, and Sif is duty-bound to stop you. One of you will have to die, because Sif cannot give you the Covenant of Artorias willingly. Maybe, in death, he can find his friend Artorias again.
Artorias' legend is a lie, but the sadness in Sif's eyes and the way he gives up as the fight goes on is true. He loves Artorias, he loves the player, and at the end of his life, he can't rage against the dying of the light any longer. Sif only attacks the player to save them, but it is possible that as he bleeds beneath your blade, that he has second thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, he can't do it. Perhaps Sif can't bring himself to kill you. And that's the video, my guys. What's your favorite VaatiVidya video? What's your favorite aspect of From Software lore? Let's discuss in the comments below, and while you're down there, smash that like button and subscribe. Ringing the notification bell is the only way to ensure you don't miss out on my analysis of Elden Ring's open world in a couple of weeks, and my review of Elden Ring Night Reign later this year. I make new gaming videos every single Friday, and you may like my other work. Consider checking out one of the videos on the screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games. Go in peace, my friends, and don't you dare go hollow.